Hi everyone, this is Dr. Alana James, and this is a video that is a redo of a webinar that occurred in January. It's a good way to start the year, isn't it? To think about ourselves and our habits and what things work for us that we want to carry on in the future and what things we might not. And this one and the next two webinars are a bit reflective, a bit introspective, and then drilling into how these ideas can be useful for doctoral or master's students. So we'll start with a quote from Steven Covey, that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And as Adrian said during the webinar, it's perhaps from Aristotle, pre-Steven Covey. And he goes on to say that knowledge is the theoretical paradigm, the what to do and the why. Skill then is the how to do, and desire is the motivation, the want to do. In order to make something a habit in our lives, we have to have all three. We'll look into that more seriously as we go on. Today's discussion starts with a little bit about what is grit as a variable, as something we study, and then how does it move into or add to the 7 habits that Steven Covey wrote about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you haven't read this book, it's a standard, been published many, many years, but it's just excellent. We'll move from there into effective goals. The first goal of his habits being proactive. The second being to begin with the end in mind. We'll discuss those. A little bit of exercise, a few tools, and some discussions from our attendees. Now, these are adding to webinars that are upcoming. One on how to plan your graduate work so it blends easily with your life, and another about how you love your master's or doctoral work this year. What is grit? If we just think about it off the top of our head, it's the ability to stick to it no matter what. But stick to it might not be all that we want to do. Because what if we work hard and then we find, as Covey would say, that our ladder is up against the wrong wall? So grit implies that we know ourselves well enough that our internal locus of control or our guidance system has in fact pointed us in the right direction, and then that we stick to it and we reap the benefits. Now, researchers have looked into grit, and I thought this was very fascinating because what they found was that 50% of us have it easier than others. In other words, when they study grit as it relates to finishing music classes, finishing special forces training if you're in the military, in fact, when it seemed to be that anything they studied always had about a 50% completion rate. Well, that's very interesting because it correlates exactly with what we see in graduate school. So that implies that some of us naturally have successfully adhered to difficult things in the past, and it sets us up for adhering to difficult things in the future. But that also that there are some other psychological determinants that we might want to look into. So Galton proposed that talent was insufficient, rather that eminent individuals displayed the ability combined with zeal and the capacity for hard work. That gets back to Covey's motivation. So, do you have the capacity, zeal, and the capacity for hard work? There are 5 constructs that are looked at: grit, self-discipline, dutifulness, achievement, and it's not like the other facets. Grit denotes an extreme stamina. in terms of particular interest and applied effort. Grit's not just about working hard on tasks, but rather working diligently towards the same high order goals from many particular points of view. So grit means we finish graduate school because no matter what the task is in front of us, we apply all those lessons that we have learned to it. Grit correlates with finishing. So I hope all of you are listening and you think, oh, I have grit. So what else do we want to say? Well, we want to form the hypothesis that the 7 habits of highly effective people are the things in which our grit can run on. In other words, they're habits that help us have all these, the zeal and the stick-to-itiveness that we're looking for. And that's why we're focused on them. So what are the 7 habits? They are 3, 4 to build our individual effectiveness. Being proactive, beginning tasks with the end in mind, and putting first things first. These will be discussed in detail in this session and the next one. Then we move from individual effectiveness into group interdependence or effective growth with other people over time. And for that, we need this habit of thinking win-win, seeking first to understand and then to be understood, and synergy. And finally, what he calls sharpen the saw. I think more people would call it rinse and repeat today, but it's how to keep these going over time. So in our series, Grit today is going to look at effective goals, being proactive, and beginning with the end in mind. Next week, or this week as I'm making this video, we're going to go into going deeper with the principles, and then finally we'll end with how does all this tie together so we just love our graduate work. Effective goals. There's a million things written about them. And to me, an effective goal is one that focuses on your results, but also stirs your heart. Because your desire to move forward, that keeps you going when times get tough. Now, Covey would tell us that this stirring of our heart is based upon the fact that we have our principles involved. And so we're going to have more about principles later. And that it gives us what's important so that we know where we want to go. It unifies our efforts, translates into daily activities, and we can see how by achieving these activities within the roles of our life, they actually add up to our personal mission. So all of these pieces fit together. Let's take them apart a bit. Let's start with the idea of being proactive. Proactiveness is the ability to subordinate an impulse to a value. I think I should sit down and work on my graduate work, but a friend calls and wants me to go out and play basketball. My ability to subordinate the impulse of, oh, that sounds good, to the greater value or principle I live by is the essence of being proactive. The alternative to proactive is reactive, and reactive people are driven by feelings first and circumstances and conditions in their environment, where proactive people are driven by values, carefully thought about, selected, and internalized values. Now think for a minute, which are you? It isn't that any of us are all these things all the time, but what happens to us, what our drop-dead response is, ultimately is what hurts us or helps us. Now, within this proactivity, we have to consider our circle of influence. We definitely can control ourselves. We can learn to control our feelings. We can certainly control our behavior, no matter what our feelings are. Outside of that, we have a circle of influence. People that we have relationship with, we can influence. Activities that we're part of in our community, we can influence. We can speak up in a meeting and show our leadership, and that's within our circle of influence. Sometimes we'll be successful, sometimes we won't, but we are working proactively to have a positive influence on our lives. There will also be some things completely outside of our control. And a proactive person focuses on their self-control and their circle of influence and leaves the things outside of their control out of their mind. Because to focus on those things is to enlarge and magnify things that you can do nothing about. So, Covey would tell us that we need to put first things first. First, we need to have a vision. Then we act on that vision. First, we make our own map. Then we chart our way and go to it. And like all maps, we may take detours, but it gets us back on. And from that, vision first, then activity. Knowing our principles first, then acting on our principles. Being proactive about what we can control, and then acting on it. All those things go together to build habits that where we can go step by step, every day at a time. Now, people in the room said that they were familiar with Covey and had seen his books or other books that followed on afterwards. And that when they thought about themselves as proactive, they ranged in the 3, 4, 5 categories, which we would expect because graduate students have already proven that they have been proactive in their undergraduate work because you got it done successfully. Now, if our attention is held, other people in the room said that if our attention was held, it's easier to be proactive than if we find something boring or doesn't grab our attention. So then we have to go back to our sphere of influence and say, even if it's boring, we still have control over ourselves. And then we can perhaps work within our circle of influence to make it less boring. So this drives us into our first exercise, one where it's about building the vision. So take a moment out to yourself and think of 3 to 5 people that you admire or who have been influential or inspirational to you. For this, just think of one perhaps, and then come back and think of others, because it is very interesting to see how they have similarities in common. Now think of 3 to 5 characteristics that come to mind when you think of those people. Notice the ones that overlap more than once. Now, compare those to yourself. Do you think you have those characteristics, and to what extent? Do you want more of them? And how do you feel when you think about yourself having those characteristics? And then take a moment, reflective moment, and imagine your life after you have become that person completely, where you embody the characteristics that you have admired in other people. That's what's driving our ability to form habits. So our second exercise is to think about habits. Habits are composed of 3 things, as Covey told us: what we know, the skills we have, and the desire we have to do it. So looking again at the characteristics of the people we admired, what would you say about their knowledge, about their skills, and probably from what you saw in them, about what the desire that they must have had to have driven them to that extent? Success, then, is determined by forming those 3 habits Those three things together to form a habit. Now, the third thing then is to bring a direction to building habits. So think of the people you described in exercise 1. Identify the various areas of your life that you want to move ahead in, and then list each area across the top of columns. So you've got the people, you've got their characteristics, you've got the areas of your life, and then merge those things together and fill in those columns with 2 or 3 of the most important results you think you can accomplish. And what are the characteristics? What's the knowledge? What's the skills? What's the desires? What habits do you need to form in order to make this happen? And then looking again at those, ask yourself, are they within your circle of influence? If not, what would you change that might increase your circle of influence? Now, let me give you an example of how this may pan out in an academic sense, because we can have all these wonderful reflective thoughts, but if we don't actually drive them down into our graduate work and what makes them better, then we've left it half undone. So, looking at the tasks I've just laid out in exercise 1, 2, and 3, let's say that one of the people you admire is a leader in your field, maybe even your supervisor. And the qualities you admire are that they have a quick brain, they know a lot about their field, and they are one of those people who just can talk to you in a way that makes you feel good about yourself. They have great kindness. So you identify that those 3 characteristics are things you want for yourself and that you would like to build into your repertoire of how you deal with things, that you want those things to become habitual. So now you have to look at, what do you need to build in yourself in order to have these habits become second nature? So you're going to need knowledge, you're going to need skills, and you're going to need desires within your sphere of influence. So let's just say that you're wanting to build more knowledge about your field. So clearly that's a go to the library and learn more knowledge. But also within that, there's a ton of skills you need to remember what you write, to keep good records, to write well so that you can use your knowledge in new ways. So you'll have a list of things that you want. Say you wanted to respond to other people with kindness, then that's a different kind of knowledge, isn't it? And you have a different level of things that you practice. But like everything else, it's driven by the desire to want to do it. So you notice when you're kind and when you're not kind. You look at other people who are kind and you figure out just what are the characteristics and how do they respond. And you watch yourself along these ways. So if these are things that you want for anything that you want to bring into your life in this year, whether it's an academic thing or a personal goal, these are the steps to do it. Looking quickly at what was going on in the room, one person said that she writes her goals, but just cannot keep herself on track to achieve them. Now, I would say that has to do then, if we're back to this slide, that would have to do with, she might know what she wants to do, and she might either not have the skills to do it or not have the desire to do it. And each of those is like a muscle that has to be worked out. Another person, Erica, said that she tries to revise her goals every day. Otherwise, they get lost in daily stuff. So that means coming to it, having a habit, being proactive about following through on your goals. And Erica said that the goals that she battled with are the ones that involved work that bored her. If she's loving what she does, she can maintain momentum. Once again, we're seeing that this circle of desire is so important in whether or not we can move forward with building the goals we want. So let's look again at being proactive. Proactive's the ability to subordinate an impulse. So you have to have enough knowledge, enough skill, and enough desire that when something else tempting comes to you, you let it go. So if you build a list of activities for the year that would be really exciting to you if you finished, and if you commit to being the person you want to be with other people and having that part of your life go forward too, then you're more likely to, and you do what Erica does, and you look at those things every day, then you're likely to be able to keep your habit going throughout the year. It's not what happens to us, but our response to what happens to us that hurts us or helps us. So if we make it through the first couple of activities, and then stuff happens and you miss a lecture, you snap at a friend, proactive says you go back to your goal, you apologize to the friend, you go back and make up the work you missed, and you get back on track. So again, proactive means we know that we're going to fall off our goals every so often, but we need to be able to get back on them. So what does Covey say that takes? This is his model. We have a stimulus. We have the freedom to choose. The freedom to choose is added to or influenced by self-awareness, imagination, consciousness, and independent will. Those three work within us and determine our response. If we could superimpose the knowledge, skills, and desire Venn diagram that we had, then your freedom to choose is also influenced by your self-awareness of how much knowledge you have, your imagination about what skills you might develop or how good it might feel. Your independent will is also tied to your desire, and those things go together to determine our response. So this was a quick look at habits and the beginning of Steven Covey's work. Do the exercises. They will help you understand yourself. It's a good time of year to be reflective. And then next week, this week, we are going to go into how principles and roles versus centeredness works, how we can be more influential, and then how this ties into the life-work balance of graduate school. So I hope you join us there. Looking at the people who were in the room, procrastination came up, as it always does when you look at goals. We have had another webinar that you might want to go back and look at. If you go in, sign into the portal that you use for Doctoral Net, and you use the search and you put in the word procrastination, or the resources menu and you put in the word procrastination, 2 different search engines, you'll find that we've done some other work that has to do with the whole topic of procrastination. It is true that life, as Adrian said, life events and health challenges make these things tough. We're not saying this is not tough, but going back to the beginning of what we started with today, everyone who is listening to this, who is in graduate school, has already had the grit to make it through tough times. So use those things to your advantage again. I hope this has been useful, and we'll see you again for another webinar very, very soon. This is Dr. Alana James, and all of us at Doctoral Net wish you the very best with your master's and PhD study.